The Republican majority in Congress is literally standing on a trapdoor right now. And California's Latino voters, well, they just put their hand on the lever. Everyone thought that the 2024 red wave was this massive, permanent realignment, like it was some structural change guaranteeing conservative power for a whole generation. But the ground is shifting right beneath our feet. We are watching a political earthquake unfold in real time. If you want to know who's going to control the House in 2026, you've got to forget the national polling. Seriously, toss it out. We need to look at precinct-level data in California's agricultural and suburban districts, because this is a wild explainer on just how fast loyal voters will walk away when they feel economically betrayed.
It's so funny. Politicians love mistaking temporary frustration for permanent loyalty. Back in 2024, working-class voters in the Central Valley and the Inland Empire, they backed the Republican ticket because they desperately wanted immediate relief from inflation and stalled mobility. But that vote? It wasn't a marriage contract. It was a trial period. Basically, it was a rental, and the lease just expired. The expectation was, hey, a new administration is going to lower our costs and stabilize the economy. But instead, the exact opposite happened, and it triggered this massive, quiet reversal right at the ballot box.
We are talking about a 25-point net shift away from the GOP in a single calendar year. Let that sink in. A 25-point shift. In politics, if you see a 2-point demographic shift, you call it a trend. A 25-point reversal? That is a total collapse. In precincts where Latinos actually make up the majority, support for the Democratic position just skyrocketed within months. It completely shattered the illusion of permanent voter loyalty. These voters are volatile, they're highly engaged, and they are ruthlessly pragmatic. They're basically grading the administration on an immediate economic curve, and right now, that grade is a failing one.
So, why did a 25-point shift happen so violently and so fast? Well, it boils down to a massive, fatal miscalculation. The governing party focused on projecting strength through all these symbolic, cultural victories, just assuming their new coalition would be totally satisfied. But here's the thing. You literally cannot feed your family with a culture war victory. When your core demographic is drowning just trying to keep the lights on, delivering cosmetic politics while totally ignoring real economic distress, that is an absolute recipe for an electoral disaster.
The disconnect here is just staggering. On one hand, you have the administration renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, right? And they're slapping these aggressive tariffs on Mexican goods. The politicians looking at this saw a decisive display of America First strength. But a Latino voter living in the Central Valley? They just saw a xenophobic insult. And the fatal damage here is purely financial. Look at the real-world impact. A foreign conflict deeply destabilized energy markets, which pushed weekly gas expenses for a Bakersfield commuter from $60 to nearly $85. Families are literally avoiding buying beef, they're holding off on having kids because basics like diapers and formula are just completely out of reach. Nobody cares about a Gulf of America sign when they literally can't afford dinner.
And let's actually slow down for a second, because the structural reality beneath those high prices is incredibly severe. Latinos make up 39% of California's workforce, but they remain trapped in sectors with significantly lower median wages. I mean, just in the construction industry alone, there is a 34% wage gap compared to non-Latinos. Across all sectors, it's a 22% earnings disparity. When you're facing that kind of systemic headwind, political loyalty is a luxury you just can't afford. You vote for economic survival. And when the party in power fails to mitigate these rising costs that are just eating away at already depressed wages, well, they are always the very first to be held accountable.
But the economy? That's really only half the story here. The other half is this visceral, on-the-ground fear. According to a recent survey, 66% of Latino respondents expressed intense anxiety about just voting in person. Why? Because of a massive escalation in immigration enforcement. We are talking about terrifying reports of violent raids impacting legal residents and U.S. citizens in mixed-status households. Green card holders getting detained. Local businesses just shutting their doors out of pure panic. Even just the rumor of federal officers showing up at polling locations created this massive chilling climate across entire communities.
Yet somehow, all of that fear didn't actually result in voter suppression. Instead, it sparked pure defiance. These voters were terrified? Yeah, but they showed up anyway. And this completely flips the script. They transformed from being frustrated economic voters back in 2024 into fully mobilized defensive voters in 2025. They walked right into the voting booth using their ballot as a literal shield to protect their families from an administration they now see as an active threat. Defensive mobilization on this kind of scale, it completely rewrites the standard political playbook.
And the math behind this whole movement is so precise and honestly pretty unforgiving. Analysts tracked over 99% of the statewide vote actually mapping census blocks directly to precinct boundaries. And by measuring the margin of a Democratic-backed proposition against the prior year's presidential ticket, the data proved one clear thing. The more concentrated the Latino population was in a precinct, the more violent the shift was against the conservative position. And the vehicle that captured all of this crazy momentum, that was Proposition 50 itself.
Which brings us to what is easily the most overlooked angle of this entire political saga, Proposition 50. Officially, it was called the Election Rigging Response Act, and this measure completely bypassed independent citizens' commissions and handed congressional map-drawing power directly over to the Democratic-controlled state legislature. Talk about a masterstroke of political timing. While the national media was totally fixated on overseas conflicts and gas prices, state Democrats just legally seized control of the maps. They framed the whole thing as a necessary defense against federal overreach, rode that huge wave of Latino defensive voting, and fundamentally altered the rules of the game.
Now, the state legislature didn't just tweak these maps. They effectively weaponized voter frustration to build an absolute fortress. Check this out. They increased Latino influence districts by 2, basically diffusing minority voting power across a much broader area. But even more crucially, they created 5 brand new safe Democratic seats and entirely eliminated 5 competitive swing seats. They strategically used the energy of all those mobilized voters to completely wipe out the competitive middle ground. It's a pretty ruthless exercise in structural survival, right? Just converting temporary public outrage into hard, locked-in congressional advantages.
So, the immediate consequences for 2026 are absolutely explosive. Incumbents are waking up trapped in districts that they barely even recognize anymore. Take Republican Representative Ken Calvert, for example. Under these new Prop 50 maps, his district's Latino voting age population surged from 29% to 55% literally overnight. He is now fighting for his political life against a demographic that, remember, just shifted 25 points away from his party. Scrambling to claw back some of that power, Republicans are now launching what will likely be the most expensive ballot battle in state history, a super strict voter ID initiative. Proponents are calling it election security, opponents are calling it calculated suppression of the exact same working-class voters who just turned against the administration. The battle lines are completely redrawn.
We are witnessing a massive, high-stakes game of political chess, and the rules are literally being rewritten mid-match. The sheer speed at which voter loyalty evaporated over economic pain is staggering. But the way that anger was legally captured and transformed into new district lines, that is even more profound. Which leaves us wrestling with the true mechanics of political survival. Is redrawing congressional maps through a partisan state legislature genuinely a necessary response to protect vulnerable voters, or is it just old-fashioned partisan gerrymandering wrapped up by a much better PR team? The answer to that question might just decide the future of the entire country.
An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, so why not invest in this channel? Click like and subscribe for more.